morning, good afternoon, good day, and a warm welcome to our participants around the world, from Gambia to Germany, India to Italy, and lots more. And it's great that we have such diversity, because today we are welcoming an equally inspiring and diverse group of panelists who represent a very unusual mix in the fashion world, far beyond the traditional value chain. And we'll be talking about what sustainability means and how we can speed up greening the fashion industry. My name is Nathalie Domeisen, and I'm your moderator today. I work for the International Trade Center, which is a UN and World Trade Organization owned agency based in Geneva, Switzerland. And this initiative is part of our GreenToCompete program, which supports small businesses to become at the heart of a green recovery. Now, just to set the stage a little bit, I believe that people are becoming more aware that what we wear has more than a monetary cost, what you pay when you go to the store. And I have a few stats that my GreenToCompete colleagues have given to me from McKinsey to set the stage. Did you know that the textiles and clothing industry produced, unfortunately, 4% of global emissions in 2018? That's 2.1 billion tons. They need to have these emissions by 2030 to meet the Paris Agreement commitments. Fashion industry is also a big water polluter. Just to give you two quick examples, runoff from cotton fields that turn rivers green with algae or toxic with chemicals, or microplastics that we now know shed when we wash synthetic clothing, depending on how we wash it. And then what about waste? We've heard from the MacArthur Foundation, a report in 2017, they said only 1% of clothes were being recycled. Okay, what do we do? Today we want to explore first what sustainability means, as I said, and then how we speed up that change to make it greener. Let me introduce to you our unusual panel. We have Nikhil Hirdaramani of Sri Lanka. He's part of a fourth-generation family business, and he is in charge of its sustainability initiatives. Their company was the first to create a carbon-neutral facility in Asia about 15 years ago. He has production facilities in Ethiopia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and of course in Sri Lanka. And we also have with us, let's say, an alternative in this model, who is Danica Flesh of Indonesia, an economist and founder of Sukacita, who takes clothing, believe it or not, from seed to closet to customer. From that, she says seed, farm to closet, seed to customer, however you like to say it. She wants her customers to understand what's behind the final product that we're wearing, from the soil to the artisanal skills and a lot more. Then we have someone else who's a little bit unusual in the fashion creation, sales, value chain, and that's Nathalie Balfroy of Belgium. She's the co-founder of Jukebox Clothes, and she's offering what she calls the first clothing library for women in Belgium. She decided she wanted to live her ethical choices 100% professional and personal, and their buyer choices are based on great design from European brands, sustainable production, and recycling potential. And we also have with us a very important person, because he's part of the process to which this session belongs, the big global climate conference that's coming up in a month, and that's Niklas Svenningsson. He's the manager of the Global Climate Action at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. He's leading a UN fashion charter for climate action, which targets lead firms in global value chains. And now that I've told you a little bit about our panelists, let's turn to the first question, which is about sustainability. Now, we've heard this word saying sustainability over the last 30 years, more and more. And it's got lots of different meanings. Some people, I've heard this, my colleagues and I have heard some people say, oh, sustainability, will the packaging fall apart before it reaches destination? Or maybe in the clothing industry, sustainability, will this clothing fall apart after 3 months, or will it last for 30 years? We've also heard sustainability recently being defined as people, profit, and planet. Where do you fit in this spectrum? How would you define sustainability? And what does it mean to you? And let's start with the person who wanted to bring this question to the panel, and that is Danica. Over to you.
Thank you, Natalie. So for me, sustainability is, as you say, is building a business model that really respects both the social and planetary boundaries. So in Sukacita, we look at it at the entire value chain. What you said is correct. We really look at it from farm all the way to the closet. So how we grow it, how we make it, but at the same time also how our consumers use it. So we are also responsible in terms of its end of life. I think what's important for us is that understanding that sustainability is really more of a journey in that complex dimension throughout the value chain. So it's not something binary that you say something is sustainable or not, basically.
And what would you say that is unique about your contribution to sustainability in fashion?
So everything we make is completely dyed with natural dyes, and that's purely because what we're seeing is that a lot of brands in the global north that are producing in global south, they're really changing the color of our rivers depending on the trend itself. So what we do is we work with women farmers all over our villages and restore indigenous regenerative farming practices, growing the natural dyes that we use in all of our clothes.
Okay, thank you. And let's turn to very different experience with Nathalie, sustainability. What's it mean to you? And where do you fit in?
Yes, thank you, Natalie. Actually, at Jukebox Clothes, we look at, first of all, how the clothes are produced. So that's when clothes are entering our process and the recycling potential, as you explained earlier. But we are really focusing the sustainability challenge into the use of the clothes and look what is happening when once it's produced and bought, what they are doing in the closet. And there we thought there was a lot of work to do in reducing the print on our planet with the volume that's in the closets for one, and also try to have most use of the clothes and enter ourselves in the economy of sharing, which is a high demand right now on the global market also. So we're really focusing on this particular place right now.
Okay, that's that's new and unique. And Nikhil, over to you. You have done something super unique. So tell us about sustainability.
I think, Natalie, I think you raised a really interesting point about the definition, because I've worked within this sector, on the sustainability side for some years. And I think when we felt, you mentioned about our green factory, when we first built it, there was a lot of focus around sustainability being very much around the environmental side. So when we did our new strategy very recently, I think one of the first things I said I wanted to do was to make sure we define it. And actually, we've gone back to a definition from 1987, actually, the Brundtland Report, to actually define sustainability. And we define it as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And that covers the aspects of both the environmental and the social. And I think, we hear the terminology ESG very often today. And I really actually am a great fan of ESG.
Spell that out for people, please.
Environmental, social, and governance, right? And I really like the G part of ESG, because I think, you need to be able to really implement and govern. And I think sustainability is something that needs to be, you can talk about the environmental and social, but the way it's implemented in organizations and the governance around it is very, very critical to create the impact. So I'm a big fan of the ESG terminology.
Okay, and where's your unique contribution, you would say, in terms of sustainability as a company?
Well, I think as a company that employs many people, I think we need to look at the whole general focus of what sustainability. Every decision we make, we have to think about every decision, what impact it has on our business, on the future, on our employees, on our communities. We have a lot of responsibilities that, being also a family business, we like to to look at our employees as just extended members of our family. You know, how would you, you know, how, so I think there's a lot of focus around that in every decision we make. You know, we have to think about that.
Okay, that's a very, it's a different kind of take because, you know, we're in the march towards the big climate conference, and you've talked a lot about the social side. And would you say that the investment on the green side also, in terms of the plants and things that you've been known for, would you say that that all fits together into one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've made some really key developments. I think at the moment, obviously, we're, you know, climate change is a focus area. I think we obviously had the impact of the social side as well with COVID in the last year, but we've made some great strides on climate. Obviously, Green Factory. You know, we have, you know, our factories are operated through solar panels. We've made some bold statements about, you know, our emissions in recent years. So I think that you know, but it has to be amalgamated. Everything we do has to be linked, and we have to look at the full package of what sustainability means in how we think. And I think our customers are beginning to do the same as well. They're not separate. I think it's all being integrated.
No, that's an interesting lesson. Nicholas, over to you. Your take on sustainability and your contribution. We don't hear you. You're on mute.
I realized that immediately is an old specialty of mine. I'm sorry. So yes, thank you so much for that question, Natalie. And I really want to refer back to what Nikhil said. I mean, the definition as such is from the Brundtland Commission, 1987. That is what has been the basis for the United Nations work on sustainability since then, including the development of the Sustainable Development Goals in the 2030 Agenda. One very easy way of expressing it is that we are not inheriting the planet from our fathers and mothers, but we are borrowing from our children. So it's our moral obligation to ensure that they can live their ways in, you know, in full prosperity and development as they should, while we also should be able to do it. So it's really very basic. It's very, very logical. If you translate this then into the fashion industry, it also means that we have to be careful with the resources in the supply chain. We have to be careful with the impact in the consumer stage. We have to ensure that consumers are getting what they need without necessarily running into a hysterical fast fashion approach and buying and throwing away as fast as possible. There's a lot of things that needs to be done there, but I also recognize, while I'm coming from the climate perspective here from United Nations, it is very, very true that you will not be able to deal with one part of the Sustainable Development Agenda. You need to look at all the 17 goals hands in hand. Social and economic development is also very, very important, in addition to the core focus we have on the environmental sustainability aspects.
Let's talk a little more in depth, turn to this fashion charter. You know, who are you targeting? How are we doing on this effort? And how are you making sure that we're going forward based on the charter?
So the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action was basically born, I would say, 3-4 years ago. It was launched 2 years ago with the objective to address specifically the climate impact of the fashion industry, knowing very well that this is operating within the universe of sustainable development. But for us, it's really a laser focus on climate action, and we are connecting with a lot of other sustainability initiatives around the world. But basically, it's a platform, it's a business-to-business collaboration. We have close to 200 of the largest brands, producers, and other stakeholders in the industry working together to develop action plans and also to implement in their company the actions that are needed to meet objectives of the Paris Agreement, which is reduce emissions by 50% in the next 10 years or 9 years and go climate neutral by the middle of this century. How are we doing? We are very much still at the beginning of the journey. This is $1 trillion sector. And it's not enough to just, identify a few policy and technical measures. You need to change the behavior and understanding of the people in the sector as well as its customers. But we're getting there. I think we're come off to a fairly good start.
Would you say that, where would you say more needs to be done? Developed countries, developing countries, producers, consumers, somewhere in between?
It's it's all in a sense. Interesting to see is that many of the big brands that we see in developed countries, you also see them in developing countries. This distinction between North and South is not so clear anymore as it used to be only 10 years ago. It is clear that the majority of the climate footprint from the fashion industry comes in the producer stage. But it's not enough just for the consumer part. The brand say, do better. They have to work together. They have to work together with the producers and with the policymakers in the production countries, to make it easy and attractive for the production companies to take the right measures. On top of that, of course, this is an industry that responds to customer demands, and we are seeing a rapidly increasing customer demand for sustainable, green, climate neutral fashion. So we hope that is coming.
Right, with the ticking clock, will it go fast enough? Let's ask Nikhil to weigh in on that as well. You're manufacturing more in what is considered the South, and I think you are selling more to what would be considered the North. Would you see those boundaries blurring? Would you see that there's responsibility on one side or the other side more, or how would you see this?
I mean, I think I think the challenge of when we set up our sustainability strategy, we also moved into this fast fashion era, which again is the reverse of what we it's non-sustainable. How do you make fast fashion sustainable, right? And I think that is still I think the last year of COVID has maybe made a lot of behavior has changed. Whether that's here to stay. I think we have to really understand whether that they are consumers who. As Nicholas mentioned, there are consumers who there are a lot of surveys about people wanting to buy sustainable, but at the moment, sustainability does cost money. It does cost more. So I think the elements of I think everyone needs to be involved. Traditionally, the model has been, the supplier, the brand has been the middle party dealing with the consumer. I think you're beginning to see that now with better communication. Some manufacturers can even communicate directly with the consumer. I think there's a lot of pressure. Consumers are now changing as well in terms of their sort of behavior and wanting to. But again, there is that cost element. So, but there's also an element of innovation that I think is taking place. And I think there's a lot of innovation around circularity, for example, which I think, if we can find ways, because you mentioned at the beginning about waste, right? And 80% ends up in landfill, right? How much is actually recycled, right? Very little. And so if there are ways, I mean, I know we'll hear a little bit about the rental model, but if there are ways of how we can actually create the innovation around, being able to use, take garments and recycle them into fiber and then produce, that would be great, because consumers still want to look, we don't know whether they're going to be able to, whether they're going to buy less clothes, or they still want to wear new things frequently. So whether that works in the rental model, whether that works. So it's really, I think it's really around bringing all the stakeholders together. And I think, really it's getting governments involved as well to a certain extent. That's why obviously there's a lot of pressure now with COP26, how a government's going to engage in this. It's bringing all the stakeholders together. So I look at SDG 17 as the most important, collaboration. How can we all work together to create this, but understanding what everyone's needs are, because everyone in the supply chain has different needs and desires.
Right. So I'm hearing you say sustainability is something that more people are interested in, but it may cost a little bit more money. And maybe, Danica, we turn to you now. Do your things cost more than other things on the market? You're going from this traceable farm to the selling in the stores, I presume. I don't know if it's your own stores or if it's chains in Indonesia. Do things cost more for sustainability? How does that work for you?
So Sukachita also works in a very different way, because everything we make is handmade. So it's very different than factory settings that are producing in mass scale. So clearly, because of all the time that is invested, for instance, one clothes would take 3 months for one woman to make, and it supports 12 families. So just looking at that, it will be more expensive than the conventional brand that you would find in the market. But I think it also raises a really interesting question, because right now, brands are not really pricing these externalities that we've been talking about into their price. The thing is, doing things right does come at a cost. And the only way current pricing model works, the way they're profitable, is because they kind of sustain a very poverty wages here in Indonesia. And also the environmental degradation is really completely subsidized by the communities who actually make the clothes. So I think it raises an interesting question, because I think the industry as a whole, we can't really change anything without really addressing the overconsumption issue that is also fueling all of these issues.
I think what I hear from what you're saying is that educating the consumer is part of what makes you unique in telling the story. So those things cost a lot more because there's some real authentic kinds of things that go into them. And what you've said to me about pricing is something that I heard just yesterday from a speaker who is working in the cocoa sector in Colombia. And she said about the soils being used, drawn down, and they're not going to be good if we keep going at the same pace. And she also said that if farmers are living on their same farms, they're not necessarily priced in the same way that you would, because you just take it for granted that these farms are there, that people have owned the land. So what you are saying is echoing other things. I think what makes your story interesting is that you're taking that from, I don't know how scalable it is, but it is something that goes from the beginning right to the consumer. And for those people who want fashion that's unique and has a story, they're just like world music. There's more and more world fashion. Many of us are wearing things from all around the world. So that it is an interesting alternative model. Just a quick question before we turn to Nathalie, to you, Danica. Do you see what's the biggest barrier in scaling up more things like yours?
I think it's really the willingness, because right now, the only way our business works is that we do intensive customer education and awareness building. And I think it's really goes on to the fact that a lot of us consumers, we simply don't know what goes behind what we wear every day. It's not like we want to intentionally hurt the planet and the people. It's just we just don't know. Like, for instance, did you know that 98% of women who make our clothes actually don't earn a livable wage? Or that the way our clothes are currently being dyed are causing 20% of the world's water pollution? And these are the issues that are completely taken out of the marketing of brands, and consumers are completely in the dark. So what we found is by actually pushing these issues forward, by providing radical transparency and traceability from farm to closet, that consumers actually want to be part of the journey, and then they actually want to pay more to get clothes that align more with their values.
Which might be part of your business, or could also have an influence on others in the fashion industry. So very interesting ripple effect, direct and indirect. Nathalie, how about you? How do you see, you're offering a service, maybe more than goods per se. We've been talking about goods up to now, and you're offering a service, proposing to rent clothes rather than buy them. Do you feel like you're also educating consumers, or do you feel like you're preaching to the converted?
I would say a little bit of both, because the tendency is really of the functionality economy, and that we see everywhere. Now you can rent about everything. And so it's the fact that not owning things, it's really something trending right now, and a demand that is growing. But also people, we see that people are very, very interested, but it's still a lot of energy to have them act on it. That's actually what we look at. And I would like to come a little bit back to this price, because we see very interesting things in the way that people come here to wear clothes and not buy them. And we see actually that many people are getting educated with the clothes that we are proposing them, and many who would consider the price the clothes we have here very expensive are now buying them because they understand what they buy, they understand the price, and they understand that it's really quality that would last longer. So I think it's interesting thing that we are creating a space to test things and then not buy wrong items, but do buy the right ones for the people, and that is actually very interesting. And we are in this project where what comes in is sustainable according to a little charter that we have planned, but also in the hope of helping developing the whole circularity and recycling and the upcycling of the clothes. So we see ourselves as a new chain in this big picture that can actually offer a lot of information, a lot of education, and also make links between all the actors. So it's very interesting for us.
If I may, you say in your description about yourself that you're buying from sustainable big European brands. What does that mean? Are you educating them as well, or just the consumer?
Right now, not the consumer. Well, European, because we are from Europe, and it's more like, I would say, local brands. It's maybe more correct for worldwide people looking at us.
If you buy their clothes,
yes,
and you rent them in the store,
yes,
and then they have a longer life because they're going back and forth,
yes.
Would they consider that a supplementary revenue channel, or
yes.
are you taking away from their business?
Not at all. We are completely supplementary, and we add customers to them. Every single customer of ours did not know the brand and go and check what the brand is doing, and if the people are satisfied, they go and buy and make the right buy. So it's really a win-win, and many of the brands we are working with are understanding this and are very happy with the collaboration. So it's really good deal right now.
No, that's pretty interesting to hear. Let's turn to Nikhil, back to Nikhil for a moment. We've gone from these kind of pilots that have a lot of influence on people, and you're dealing with a lot larger scale manufacturing. Tell us, first of all, what made you decide to go green back in the day, and what would encourage others like you to do the same?
Well, actually, I mean, I'll tell you a really sort of interesting story. I mean, I think it was maybe 2005, 2006. I mentioned we're a family business. I think one of my uncles came into the office one day and just read Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, and said to us, you know, we need to do something. And as a family, again, based on business values, we felt it was the right thing to do, and we did it, and we built, the start of it was building the green factory, we had to find, there had to be a business case. I mean, and there was a bit. I mean, I think what you find with sustainability is that there is a longer term business case. So, you may have to put more money up front, but actually you see the benefits later on. So it's a different type of model, right? But, with electricity costs and various things, so we built this, and I think that was the start of our journey, and I think it really sort of allowed us then also to see other benefits in our factory, because we built a whole community. So our factory was not just on its own, a green factory. We built a whole community around it. That we helped, supported the community, we educated the community, we helped some of the farmers, we recycling, our food waste was, so there was all sorts of things around the community, and in the end it had an impact also on lower retention rates in the factory. So it was a really interesting project that had benefits later on, and then of course we implemented a lot of that into our other facilities as well and around the world. I think there is that business case, and I think you've got to really be able to look at that business case around it. Not everyone can do it. SMEs, I think over the last couple of years, I've been involved in a lot of industry initiatives, looking at within the apparel industry, trying to see how we can actually support the whole industry, because my company may be able to do it, but we need to try and support everyone else. I don't think there's any competitive advantage eventually in sustainability. I think we need to help everyone to be more sustainable. So how can we support SMEs? And I think it's really understanding this whole business case. The other thing that I think should be mentioned as well is it's very difficult to understand how to measure sustainability. There's a lot of standards, a lot of measurements out there. And I think if we can simplify that and make it easier for people to understand, because we hear the terminology greenwashing quite significantly today in the press. And that's because I think people are confused as to, we talked about the definition initially, but also how do you actually measure sustainability in the apparel industry? There are tools out there. I mean, I'm involved in the Higg Index. There are tools out there, but I think that we need to get together and standardize that to make it more simplified, so consumers and everyone in every stakeholder can understand what it actually means.
There's a whole, that's a whole separate discussion, the whole discussion about standards and costs related to sustainability standards, which have gone from very few in the 1980s to over 200 major ones today. And I just want to say in passing that we have a Trade for Sustainable Development panel on Monday, this coming Monday, and we will be looking in depth with people from government, from business, academia, small producers and so forth about all of the issues related to voluntary standards. So if there are people here who would like to know more about that, please do come back and join us on Monday at the Trade for Sustainable Development Forum. But because that is a huge, huge topic of how do we, those voluntary standards are a way to help us become more sustainable, but they have a big cost, don't they? And I know you've expressed in the past the cost of all of these standards.
Audit fatigue is again another challenge in our industry. How do we reduce the number of audits that have to be done and to make it more simplified?
Yes, and I understand there's more of a pre-competitive things that people are doing together even before you go into those voluntary standards. Is that going to reduce the costs a little bit?
Well, I mean, I think we have to look at it as a whole to really see. But I think again, it all brings, if everyone can accept, and at a certain standard, and we know what we need to be. We need to know, what sort of, what the scope is of the field, right? To understand where we need to be, what we need to do, and everyone needs to be aligned. I think that will really help.
Oh gosh, easy to say, and people are working on it. Let's turn to Nicholas, who is working on this and is doing a lot of coordination effort. He's told me before the session that they are targeting what he thinks is about 20-30% of the emissions in the industry by focusing on that big group there. What would you say? I have two questions for you. One is, what would you say has been the greatest success in the initiative so far? And the second question I would say is, if you had to pick 2 or 3 things that companies could implement to go faster and accelerate going green, what would it be?
Okay, well, thank you for that. Well, I would say one of the biggest early successes we have had is really that all signatories to the Fashion Charter are now measuring, assessing, reporting on their climate footprints. And this is a necessary first step for anybody, really. If you're going to address your climate footprint, you need to understand where it comes from. And I think we have seen, while in general, we have a good idea where emissions come from, I think that for many signatories, there have been some surprises for them saying, oh, that is really where we have both the problem and the opportunities. So I think this is really important. We, of course, have started a number of programs and projects related to raw material selection, on phasing out the use of coal-fired boilers in production facilities, educating customers, and so on. To your second question, I would say that generally speaking, for fashion companies, if you have 3 things that you need to do, I would say that, first of all, just find out where you are, map your position, understand what your impact is and where your solutions are. Secondly, this is something that you cannot really do it piecemeal. It needs to be integrated into the DNA of the company or organization. You can't give it to junior engineer and say, fix our climate footprint. No, this needs to be in every investment decision, in any long-term planning that is being taken by the board or the CEO, to really understand that this is something, whatever we invest in, it needs to drive us towards our target, our goal. The third thing is, of course, relates to the money. And in that case, the money depends either if you're a producer or if you're a brand or if you're a consumer. For a producer, of course, and I am convinced about this, that in the long run, there will be governmental policies and incentives that are going to favor low climate or low carbon fashion producers. The whole Paris Agreement is set up in such a way that these policies, these incentives, they will have to come. For a brand, it is also a matter of making sure that climate neutral, green, sustainable fashion is attractive. We know that most consumers today buy with the purse. They are looking for what they have at the cheapest possible price. And it should not be difficult, it should not be more expensive to select clothes that are friendly, sustainable, climate friendly and sustainable. And for that, there are two things. One thing is just well, I'm saying just, it's not just, but it's really to review the whole selection, the whole process that they're doing in selecting and producing and pushing out what they're selling in the stores or on the internet. But the other thing is also to engage with the consumers, because as I said, there is an increasing awareness and concern around consumers that they want to be part of the solution, not of the problem. But they need to know that what they are buying is actually not exasperating the climate challenge and crisis, but it's actually going towards a better world. So maybe that is more than two things, but those are things that I would like to put the finger on.
I do hear a lot about raising awareness and education that's coming across in this session, whether it's to other small firms, medium-sized firms, large firms, consumers, producers. So there's a lot already that one can do in raising awareness. I'd like to come back to the question of the magic wand and what you would do if you had a pot of gold and you were sustainable finance. But I think there've been a fair amount of questions that have been coming in. Let's see, and I haven't really had time to digest them, but here's a few. Here's one, let's see. Demand for more sustainable products is on the rise, but the big picture isn't changing very much. Maybe it's because there's an increase in the world's demand, both because population is rising rapidly and because of wealth. Is that also true in the apparel industry? Well, would anyone say no? I think we'd all say yes to that. I mean, that's what we've been talking about in the beginning of the session. We are raising awareness, we are making a difference, but the bar needs to move faster. Should all policies and regulations, and you can keep this in mind for your best recommendations, also what's coming in from the audience. Should policies and regulations be enforced in a way that all textile products should be sustainably manufactured, however that's defined, by default, so that we have a level playing field? That one goes to Nicholas and Nikhil. But let me just see what else we have here. Who needs to be prioritized in the fashion supply chain to access green finance? We're going to that magic wand question. And what's keeping us from scaling up approaches that we've seen, whether it's from the Good Fashion Fund or for any one of these kinds of things, particularly though with green related loans for textiles? Gosh, so there's a lot of questions here actually coming through about turning from education to follow the money and where does it come from? But we also have a question there about should policies start, at the base? Who would like to start and answer any of these questions?
Maybe I can give a try. I'm not going to try to respond to all of them. I think my fellow panelists are better suited on that. But one or two things I want to mention. The question about policy and regulation. I'm sitting here in Germany, And here, if you have a regulation, you have a law, it is enforced and people follow it because that's how it is here. I've also spent a very large part of my time in other parts of the world that is not Germany. And you can have the best regulations in the world, but if they are not credibly enforced, and if they are not realistic, there's not going to change anything. It's one thing that is really interesting, for example, if you go into a producer country such as Cambodia, they have very high ambitions in the industry itself to go green and climate neutral. But in order to do so, they need to have access to renewable energy, which right now is stopped by governmental policies that is not giving favor to renewable energy. So it's necessary to understand the situation on the ground. But I also think that there are many other policies than only regulation. You have economic incentives, awareness is part of regulations, different kind of rewards and incentives that can be put in place for this. So I think one needs to use a whole toolbox, and I don't think there's a magic bullet that is going to solve all the problems all over the world at once. But definitely sound policies is a very important part of that, and that is clear.
Okay, anyone else? Who else would like to?
I think we're at a really interesting time in this industry. I think we haven't made much reference to what happened last year with COVID, but I think the way with COVID and how the industry with the impact of decisions being made in one part of the world and the impact it had in other parts of the world, right? And I think we really saw how the model of the apparel industry really needs to be rethought, and the different stakeholders need to be engaged. So I think one of the questions here is, should policy regulation be enforced to all textiles be safe and sustainable? Well, we've already had this discussion today. What does sustainable mean, right? We don't even know what that means. So we're not in a position to unless we actually want to understand what it means, you might have different definitions. We're not able to really define that. So I think this is a great opportunity to bring in everyone to really rethink. And I think in the past, there've been discussions with brands and in isolation. I think we're at an opportunity now, especially we live in a virtual world, right? To bring in, to really understand how this industry really needs to look towards the future, because it is going to change. There are different players coming in. We talked around the rental models. They're different players. I mean, even the sort of the Amazons and they're different players in the market now. And I think it's a time that we really need to figure out what impact all decisions make. And I think we need to look at it as a global sphere, right? I think we really need to look at the global impact of the apparel industry, because we are one of the most polluting industries in the world, but we also we're also doing a lot. There's a lot going on out there that maybe is not talked about, that maybe is not communicated. And I think that has also come up in this discussion today. I mean, how do we storytell? There's so much going on in the supply chain that never gets to the consumer, so we need to be able to tell a story, and we need to have the mechanism and the means to be able to tell that story, whether it's done directly or it's done through brands or whatever. But we can tell that story now. There is a lot. We always hear a lot of the negativity, but there's a lot of positive stuff going on in the supply chain.
We have to capture.
We really need to be able to communicate that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Danica, Natalie, do you have anything to add? I think we're really all singing in different ways from similar song sheets, actually. Okay.
But I think it's a really interesting point that Nikhil raised about COVID and the impact on the industry as a whole, because I think it's related to that question that you wanted to ask us about the magic wand. I think it's really interesting if we could create regulations and communication between brands and governments such that we can actually create like smaller, more cap-sized companies that have local, self-sufficient and resilient value chains instead of this highly outsourced, globalized value chain. I think that way we can actually really significantly reduce the carbon emission from just shipping things around.
Mm-hmm. Natalie?
Yes,
you're challenging us.
I'm actually also. It seems very untouchable. This huge network of the lack of trace of the product that the consumer. But to go back to the magic wand, of course, at my very low scale, financing is always a challenge. But also, I believe in the power of the people. And as long as there is so few people demanding sustainable as whatever for each other it may mean. But there are changes. COVID year has really made more awareness, and that's good. But if we look at global, it's still very too little of the awareness of the consumers and what they want, and they have the power to decide. And I think that's really one very important place to change the industry, because it's true remarkable what so many industries and brands and factories are doing to get better and to go green, and maybe not talked enough, but still it needs a customer response, and I really believe that there is a huge force beside the governments and all the directives that can be there, and at our small scale we try to do that.
So I'm hearing calls for maybe even financing and the magic wand and collaboration to be directed towards awareness raising towards consumers, but also at different places in the industry. And also sustainable financing maybe for small businesses that want to do the equivalent of people who want to buy their vegetables locally, and they maybe want to buy their clothing locally. Nikhil, you've talked about, you are actually teaming with ideas about innovations that could be financed by people perhaps who could supply your company. And if I understand correctly, you know, that may not be easy to get up and going. Would you see sustainable finance be targeted in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned at the beginning, you know, when your research around the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and they're obviously a global think tank on circularity, right? And we've been working very closely with them around, you know, producing sustainable jeans. And what we find is that, you know, in that project over the last couple of years, we see that there's a lot of innovation going on, right, in different parts of the world, right? And you know, how can we actually commercialize this technology? And I think it's about also bringing in the different stakeholders. A lot of the times, the innovation may be happening in a laboratory, and you know, in Europe somewhere. How can we engage? Because this is our future, right? I mean, you know, we talk around the different models. At the end of the day, people want to still wear new clothes, right? So if we can actually, I think circularity is one of the biggest. Circularity and transparency for me are the two big buzzwords, but the two actions that we need to address. If we can actually look at the innovation around circularity and find ways to make that happen and make that a reality, I think it, again, because I've also got to think about the impact on my factories, you know, what all these models mean. But I know that if I can recycle fabric, I can still continue to make clothes that will continue to, you know, sustain my own business, right? And I've got to think about that. So I think there's, you know, funding in terms of innovation around this particular topic, I think is going to be very critical for the future, and could actually help address a lot of the issues we're talking around the pollution and the carbon emissions of the industry.
Okay, Nicholas, do you have anything to add on the pot of gold and the magic wand?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, really, what I would like to add here is, and this is what we're doing in the chart. Actually, you don't need a magic wand and a pot of gold for this, but what we want to do is really to connect and to, if I may say, educate the policymakers in the producer countries in particular. They have a huge role to play here. It's of interest, of natural interest, that this industry is thriving, and they are not going to thrive and be able to meet the climate convention's objectives if they are not addressing this. So I think there's a lot, you know, to make that connection that is needed here. Of course, every fashion company also needs to look inside their own company and start taking action here. There's no time as a present, but I also note that there are a number of very large players here who we are not able to reach yet. You know, trading companies are neither producers nor brands, but they're connecting all the different parts of that. It's been extremely difficult to get them on board here, and I think there's I think the best way to reach them is actually through regulation and policy making, and I'm sure we're going to get in eventually. So I think that is on my list. I don't think we need a big pot of gold. I think that many companies, especially SMEs, need a big pot of gold, not a big, but a small pot of gold to be implementing, you know, many of the activities and options that I know they want to do and they can do. But on our side, not so much the money, but, you know, the connections. That is what we need to further strengthen.
Well, it's interesting when you're talking about small firms and access to finance. One of the challenges we found in our surveys at the International Trade Center is that they don't know where to go to tap the information for the networks and for the funding. So when we're talking about awareness and making connections, obviously that is something our organization does, but I think that is something that everyone needs to think about at the national level, at business chamber levels, at any kind of levels where you have a multiplier effect, because this information is not necessarily getting to small businesses who could be really helping to make a difference and getting those innovations and scaling things up, and maybe connecting to some of these bigger lead firms in the value chains, or doing their own thing in other ways. We don't have a whole lot of time left, and I think it would be good. We've covered so much ground. I want you all to know that in about a week maximum, we will digest and we'll put out a little story about this event. So if you'd like to hear about the conclusions, I believe that anyone who's registered to this will get a copy of that short story that we'll do on this. But let's give you all perhaps one last round. If you had to say very quickly, say in a minute, what would you see as the priority? Not the priority, let's say the priority in terms of your own business model, because that's why you're here. Each of you have something special and that's a little bit unique that we can share with other people. One thing that you would say, just one, that would inspire someone else to go green if they're thinking about it, and who would that someone else be? Let's start with Danica.
For me, it would really be seeing the change that is happening in our villages, in the lives of the women that we work with. I think once you see that, it's just something that you can't not do. I think by continuing to just do what we believe is right, we can really inspire others to join and then change their value chain for good. And I think it's really proof that when it's made right, fashion can actually really be such a force for good. And then the fact that it's going to impact the lives of so many women is really key in really achieving sustainable development in developing countries actually. So it's a really important factor, and the time to change is now.
So if someone were looking to set up a seed to store and closet business like yours, you would say be inspired by the good that you're doing at the ground level. And that is what drives you and can drive so many others like you to develop similar businesses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Natalie, how about you?
Well, hearing all the conversations, then I remembered one of the rocket goal we gave to ourselves when we started this project, Sky is the limit, right? Is that we become such a quality and inspiring platform and necessary platform that some of the other brands go more green to get distributed through us. So I would say that if we have reached that, then we would be very, very, very happy, because that would be amazing to have such an impact that brands are inspired to go more green, to come with us at our scale. So
your message to other renting, not recycling, but rental firms for fashion is really think about who you're associating with and try to educate backwards as well as forwards. And that's where you feel you can create critical mass. Very interesting. Yeah. Nikhil, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had a really challenging year. I think the industry, manufacturing, you know, it's been around, you know, I think many factories, it's really been around survival, right? But as I say, there's this opportunity now to recreate this new model, right? And I think my message would be to think about every stakeholder and how you can engage them. As a manufacturer, you know, all these new models we're talking around, but think about the impact of what it's going to be for the future. How can we be engaged? How can we be engaged in this new norm that is going to be there? And we're willing to. I think there's a lot of willingness to want to. Manufacturers have been, or, you know, many manufacturers have been on the sustainability journey for quite some time. And I think it's, you know, how can we be more engaged, bring us involved into the conversations, because any decisions made are going to affect us as well. So we need to be part of that conversation.
Part of the conversation, and people should militate for that. That's also, and togetherness. This togetherness sounds simple, but there's a lot behind it.
I know.
Yes.
I just find, and also the whole innovation. I mean, this circularity. I think I'm pushing that because I really think it's a really big topic out there, and we need to put all the resources we can to make it happen.
You've said circularity and transparency.
Yeah.
Nicholas, we're closing the session. What would you say looking forward in terms of the COP discussions? How can we take this further? Are the kind of things we're talking about today, can they come to a more concrete next step in terms of big discussions? What should people be doing at the lobbying level, intergovernmental level? Where do we go with this?
No, it's the COP is looming on the horizon, and it's a COP that is going to be very important. Many different issues need to be resolved, especially the fine print of the Paris Agreement that will allow us full implementation of the Paris Agreement. The negotiations as such are actually fairly abstract, but there are a number of sectors that are being spotlighted through the Global Climate Action Agenda. Fashion is one of them. We are going to have 2-3 events that are addressing specifically what is happening in fashion and what needs to be done. And through those events, we're also trying to influence the policymakers who are at COP and are elsewhere in the world. A very important part here is the national action plans, what they call naturally determined contributions. So every country, we have 191 countries who have submitted their action plans for what they are going to do about the climate. And they are supposed to increase the ambition until we reach the targets. Today, we know that we need to reduce emissions by 50% in the next 10 years. The action plans show that we're going to increase it by 16%. So we're not at all where we need to be. And every government needs now to look on how can they increase their ambition. The fashion sector is right in the target here. So I think we should look forward to some ambitious outcome out of Paris, or sorry, out of Glasgow it will be, and then that they are translated by national governments into more actionable, concrete actions at the national levels.
And with that, I would like to give a huge thanks to this panel who has generously contributed their time, their ideas, their inspiration. We're coming from the International Trade Center, as I said, the GreenToCompete program. And I thank everyone and hope you will look forward to hearing more from all of us. And a very good day to you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.